Alright people, this is a complicated one. On one hand, I loved Diamond is Unbreakable, but now that I've been through the first 21 episodes of this one, I think part 4 might have some competition for my heart. And I say that because I blitzed through this arc. I even think I ended up watching all 21 episodes that I'll be covering in this video over the course of 24 hours. Like, this really held my attention like none other before it. And what's more is, this is an arc I can honestly say is unlike any of the other 4, and I mean that in the best possible way. There's a clear attention to detail and a design behind it that gave it so much of an upside for me. So, today I can't wait to share with you all my very first impressions of, thoughts on, and review for the fabled 5th part of this manga epic. This is the brutally bloody, the heart-stoppingly compelling, and the relentlessly intense JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind.
Fighting Fighting
As I mentioned before, this week I'll be covering the first half or the first 21 episodes of the 5th part to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Golden Wind. Set in 2001 Italy, it's the first part to take place almost immediately after the events of the prior, which was set during the year of 1999. However, that's not to say that there aren't some key differences right off the bat with this one. Obviously, these surroundings are gorgeous and faithful to its setting of Italy. If any of you have taken the time to look up anything about Araki, you'll know that this guy loves Italy. Secondly, and perhaps more critically, his characters throughout this series have never looked regular or normal, for whatever that word is worth. In the beginning, he would opt to have characters with biceps bigger than their character arc, complete with Mr. Universe poses. And slowly, over the course of the series, he replaced muscles with clothing, and there's nothing wrong with that, if not for this part, because holy crap! Okay, so he fills the world with regular people wearing regular clothes, and then we see this guy wandering around town casually. Humans don't wear stuff like this, or maybe they do. I mean, I don't know. I haven't been outside since February of 2020. Jokes aside, there's a considerable amount of effort after going into all of the character designs for this story. Every one of these main characters, and I mean everyone, has a unique design boasting outlandish clothing that would make any grandmother shake their head in disapproval. Who would have thought that when he drew Jotaro's school uniform and hat, which, by the way, made sense when he first drew it, but over the course of the story began to fuse with his head, who would have known that after seeing all of that, Araki was actually holding back? It makes you wonder what this guy's dreams are like. Now, I'm being lighthearted right now, and I think that's with good reason. This story is easily the most brutal and graphic in this series, and that's coming from my viewing of the anime. If you didn't see my review for part 1 of this series, it's obvious that a lot of the stuff that gets left on the chopping room floor is the gore from the series, and so you can well imagine what the manga for this section looks like. And yet, it starts out in a surprisingly quiet way, just following Giorno as he walks through his hometown of Naples, Italy. Special thanks to Dragon Raja for sponsoring today's video. Dragon Raja is an open-world MMORPG that features spectacular graphics for iOS and Android mobile devices, brandishing all the polish of a AAA console game you can carry around in your pocket. Dragon Raja also sports the best character designs I've ever seen on a mobile device, allowing you to create your own ideal self in-game. Plus, they just got a new update that added the brand new class Phantom Sound. This class is clearly designed around a particular theme, that being music and rhythm, which, from a design point of view, shows the level of thought the team behind this game has put into it. With this new update, it also added the new career of Pet Expert, where we can obtain new pets through daily tasks and pet breeding. However, the open world is something I think you all can really appreciate. Standing in the streets can cause traffic jams, you can buy coffee, and you can dance. Lastly, but certainly not least, February 27th is Dragon Raja's 1-year anniversary, where you can get fun prizes including outfits and vehicles simply by logging onto the game or their official Facebook page. Prizes will be available until March 14th, 2021, so check out my link in the description to download the unlimited fantasy MMORPG Dragon Raja now. Here you can be whoever and play however. And now, back to the video. Introduction to the new main character. While much more subtle than prior more bombastic character introductions, this one is surprisingly effective. Which is an appropriate take, I think, because Giorno is a remarkably understated personality. Not necessarily an understated character because, well, Yeah. Walking past a considerable number of crimes, he immediately distinguishes himself from Jonathan, Joeseph, Giorno, and Josuke, who all would have intervened in all of these encounters. Right from the get-go, it paints a much darker image of the world we are entering into, and tells us a little bit about Giorno as a result. Through a brief but telling interaction as he helps some tourists retrieve their formerly stolen wallet, he introduces us to his brand of justice and morality. Stealing from the two girls, it's clear that he only cares about what concerns or affects him directly for the most part. However, when he sees a small hungry child, he goes out of his way to buy him some ice cream using the money he just stole. This small but character-defining gesture, while brief, becomes part of a much larger vision or motivation for Giorno in this story, who effectively, when it all boils down to it at the end of the day, wants to acquire enough power to change people's lives for the better. And this isn't the only instance where Araki changes up the formula on us either. In fact, he does so at almost every single turn in this story. For instance, right after we learn that Giorno is a con man, we cut to the airport where he grifts and scams tourists, but also where this little fellow arrives on the scene. After taking out a competing grifter in Luca, both Giorno and Koichi have a brief but very fun encounter. Apparently, Heaven's Door, Rohan's ability, can give you information that neither he nor the person receiving the information ever had, like being able to speak fluent Italian. So automatically he becomes the most powerful or valuable stand user in existence. I mean, in the last act, they could have just written into Jotaro's head, "I know what Yoshikage Kira's new name is," and we could have forgone all of that story. Ain't that fun? Anyway, once Giorno tries to steal Koichi's luggage, the two of them soon find out through various hiccups that they are both stand users. With the main takeaways from this conflict being, Giorno successfully steals Koichi's passport and money, has a stand that can create life and deal damage to anyone that would damage that life, and Koichi gains some respect or favor from Giorno as he never went all out against him, proving to him that he meant no harm. There are a lot of subtle things like that at play in this story, which make it, I think, a much more adult version of a JoJo's story. Oh, and did I mention that Giorno's father is Dio? Well, it is, so that's a thing. Apparently that's what Koichi is there to investigate upon, to see what this new young spawn of JoJo's devil is up to. It is around this time in the story where I noticed that this tale is making a clear effort to not only change a number of key positions usually given to particular personalities within the story, but structurally, once again, Araki decides to shake things up completely, and in a direction I never thought it would go. While I thought Diamond is Unbreakable served to combine all of the main narrative attributes of its three older brother parts exceptionally well, I personally thought that while the structure of it was fun, I also felt that, while better than Stardust Crusader's episodic nature, Diamond is Unbreakable lacked direction at a lot of pivotal moments for me specifically. Now, I want to clarify right off the bat that that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. A lot of people enjoy slice of life hijinks, and it worked remarkably well for that story, given how attached to the characters I became and how nostalgic I was towards the very end of that story. However, with all of that said, and taking nothing away from Diamond is Unbreakable, structurally speaking, I think Golden Wind is much more suited to my personal sensibilities as a viewer. Everything flows together remarkably well. Every encounter makes sense for the narrative, and each episode informs the next. Giorno wants to climb the ranks of the mob empire to gain power and influence over his struggling town. He meets Bruno, who fights him after he learns he killed Luca. This is a great mini fight, by the way. He befriends Bruno and then meets his boss to try to get a job. His boss tasks him with holding this lighter and keeping the light aflame for 24 hours. Koichi causes trouble during this time because Giorno stole his passport. They get into trouble together and fight a Shadow Man, also a great fight by the way. Giorno proves himself to the boss, but he was only doing so he could get a chance at assassinating him. And he does so, and now he works with Bruno. Everything flows naturally into the next main plot point, all the while taking the main cast and every supporting character's motivations into consideration, making, for me, Golden Wind a prime example of, and so therefore, storytelling, while not sacrificing what brought it to the dance in the first place, its creativity and artistic expression. While I know that what I'm about to say is very English school major nerdy, out of all the action and awesomeness these first few episodes gave me, my favorite part is easily when Koichi comes into Giorno's room at the worst possible time. And it's my favorite because it's a perfectly executed tension riser. This isn't happening just because, it's happening as a direct result of who Giorno is. He stole Koichi's passport, and so therefore, Koichi is looking for his passport where Giorno is. And speaking of Koichi, something that really caught my eye in particular during this section also was once again another first for the series. On top of this being the first with a morally complex protagonist and the first one to be directly related to Dio, this is also the first sequel story to not incorporate the prior cast in any meaningful way. Apart from the first couple of episodes in the first half, Golden Wind doesn't make any use of Koichi or Jotaro's characters, instead opting to carry the entire story on the backs of a brand new cast of colorful characters, all the while pursuing a goal that ties them all together. Take down the main boss of the criminal syndicate that they're working under that's never shown his face. Everything that's happened up until this point has been set up. Entertaining setup, but set up nevertheless. From this point on, we are entering the main meat of this video, and the plot doesn't deviate from it once from here on in. And now with their old capo dead and his fortune to claim for themselves, they embark on a journey to the island of Capri, now as a larger team with Giorno in their ranks. Journey to Capri. Something I've noticed after completing half of this exciting tale is that Araki, despite taking a much more linear serialized approach, still employed mini side stories throughout this arc, but not in the same way he had done so in the past. With arcs like Stardust Crusaders and even Diamond is Unbreakable, to a large extent, he would often establish the goal and make the means with which they achieve that goal known from the very beginning. Go to Egypt or find the killer, etc. However, with this one, Araki opted to create two separate goals. Find out the identity of the boss so they can kill him, and with the second one being discovered during this particular section. And so, while these side stories are complete stories into and of themselves in their own respect, they are still very much intrinsically part of the original ongoing story, building upon material and setup from the prior episodes. For instance, this section begins on the back of Giorno's assassination of Bruno's team capo, and as such is built upon the back of that consequence. Bruno introduces Giorno to his team, and over the course of this adventure we come to learn about each of these new characters until we become intimately familiar with them. Heck, I even know all of their names, and that's really rare for someone like me. I mean, we got Bruno, Fugo, Mista, Leon, and Naranzia. A beautifully Italian name.
Oh, he said it with so much confidence and still got it wrong.
Okay, hello native Italian speaker, can you please tell us how you pronounce the name of that character in JoJo?
Narancia.
Thank you.
Despite right now only being familiar with Giorno and maybe Bruno to a lesser extent, by the time this story reached its midpoint, I found that I loved certain members of this team more than the main character Giorno and had a bond established with all of them. Similarly to Stardust Crusaders that put a heavy focus on the side characters, Golden Wind is in all intents and purposes structured identically to Stardust Crusaders without the episodic monster of the week type format. Through our first introduction to the team, it's clear that they don't trust Giorno yet, and each of them fulfill a particular personality role within the team.
Narancia.
Is the youngest of the group, he's lovable and a bit of an airhead. Fugo is effectively the opposite of
Narancia,
being a bit abrasive and something of a young prodigy. Leon is sort of the tough guy of the group. As a former police officer, he acts as the detective of the team. And finally, we have Mista. I love Mista. He's got a great energy around him and is possibly the friendliest of the group. And we learn all about these key character elements through the first scene and subsequent scenes that follow shortly after they hop into the boat bound for Capri, with the goal of claiming their former capo's fortune for themselves. And once the first bit of trouble makes itself known to the group, right as they were sailing, we get the first hint as to how Araki will be structuring this story. This Capri storyline is spent on two major battles with one quick consequence at the end that leads to the rest of the story. Again, keeping in theme with every action informing the next, this first battle takes place on a yacht, and through this interaction we learn about Leon's backstory as a former police officer wanting to make a greater change in the world, as well as his absolutely insanely useful stand power that allows him to relive certain scenes from different perspectives in the past. Once we overcome that gent of the ship that turns out to be another ship within the same ship, we land on Capri and figure out more about the character of Mista. The most interesting element to both of these encounters, apart from allowing the audience to get to know these characters while also telling the story at the same time, is how it establishes the differences between everyone on the team through the only character we know, Giorno. Leon refuses to show his stand ability in front of Giorno, proving to us that he still doesn't trust him. However, Mista on the island doesn't have remotely the same hang-up. surface, Mista's stand ability seems to be sort of cartoonish and somewhat limited. What he ends up contributing to this story is some of the most entertaining portions of it. Everything from humor to sadness to edge-of-your-seat action. Araki constructed this story to feel as though everyone and anyone is capable of meeting their end at any time. And they almost do on so many occasions. Unlike all the other arcs in the story where characters, good and bad, would be either incapacitated and later learn their lesson or wander off into obscurity, characters here in this part die. And not just die, they get brutally murdered by the good guys. Alleviated somewhat by the colourful and lighthearted interactions they share with each other, these death scenes are more brutal than any I've come across in the past. Employing in this section with Mista some overdone encounters like a chase on a truck that is made all the more fun utilizing stand powers, making the circumstances feel so fresh and enjoyable. Ending in a Clint Eastwood type standoff with this guy getting shot in the head real good.
Boom! Headshot! Now that's a lot of damage!
It soon becomes obvious that there are a number of competing gangs looking for the same fortune that they are, and once they find it, they too come across a gentleman in possession of their next mission, to deliver the boss's daughter home. For Bruno, now the new capo, and Giorno, this is ideal, giving them an excuse to get close to the boss in some capacity and assassinate him. This is their once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and their team doesn't need to even know about it. Narancia versus Small Man. Once the boss's daughter, her name is Trish by the way, arrives on the scene in inconspicuous clothing as a janitor, she soon chucks the getup and throws on her ridiculous outfit, to match the rest of the main characters. So, as I guess not to draw attention to herself. Also, she's super high maintenance and so forces Narancia to go out and grab some supplies before they make their way to the next stop. This is one of the coolest ideas for a fight I've come across in a long while, and certainly within JoJo. While the plot slowly progresses towards a satisfying finish, I hope, I really enjoyed the narrative decision made by Araki during these combat sequences. Instead of isolating the lifespan of particular fights to the pages of a couple chapters, or in the case of prior arcs, one episode, this story allows the fight to breathe and explore all the possibilities their powers offer them in tandem with this setting they find themselves in. This battle with Narancia and the guy that can make himself small is honestly brilliant. Not just for showcasing Narancia's cool and powerful stand, but also because of the worsening circumstances this shrinking man's stand power can do if enough time elapses. In essence, if Narancia can't put away this guy fast, his chances will only get worse and worse as he slowly but surely shrinks into his own defeat. And let me tell you, they do everything with this premise. With the elements used and the ultimate defeat of this shrinking man being equally engaging and satisfying, a lot of the dialogue in prior fights would consist of immediate concerns brought forth by the present battle. However, much of these dialogue exchanges in Golden Wind concern themselves primarily with motivations linked directly to the broader story, while also serving as a great launching off point to inform us, the audience, about the backstory of characters like Narancia, to help build a bond with them, and in the case of the Shrinking Man, we get to see some of his past too, through which we learn about his extended team of stand users on the trail of Bruno and Giorno's team. He returns back to base and discovers that Bruno has received an email directly from the boss. They need to go to the Archaeological Park where there's a hidden key for a vehicle that they can use to bring his daughter home. They split the team. One half with Giorno goes to get the key, the other half with Bruno stays here and guards the daughter of the boss. The Archaeological Park. Our time spent at this archaeological park once again gives us an opportunity to get to know a new member of the squad, all the while building a new bond between the characters on screen and progressing the plot. During this section, we come to learn more about Fugo. With an IQ of 152, he managed to get into university remarkably early. However, was kicked out after he attacked a professor. However, as has been the case with almost all of these backstories, including Giorno's, the initial description of their past doesn't seem to match up with how the events actually measured up when explored. These are all victims in some shape or form, with Fugo particularly falling into that category, helping to explain how and why he is so detached and aggressive so much of the time. The battle that takes place is awesome, with a focus, of course, following Fugo as he gets trapped inside the mirror dimension. Where have I seen that before? But both Giorno and Leon get some minor shine during this outing too.
As I'm editing this video, it literally just occurred to me that he's been saying Leone wrong the entire time, which is really funny because he only started saying that first name because he was too scared to say Abacchio. I give up. I give up. I've tried. I'm sorry.
And thanks to their combined effort and some jaw-droppingly clever thinking on behalf of Giorno, Fugo's ridiculously powerful stand gets a target to take out. However, what was brought to my attention during this section wasn't necessarily all of that, though it was knocking around in there, but what I really was thinking about was how little of Giorno I've gotten to see during this part of the story. Once the setup in the initial episodes wrap up, Giorno feels very much like a stand-in for the audience at times, allowing for exposition to be explained, which again is vital, but also feels like he's very much in service equal part to the side characters, making the entire team themselves feeling less like side characters and more like main characters. And no section made me feel this more than what comes next after they discover the key and the vehicle that it fits into. Battle on the train. Of the three major battles before this climax, I had to say that this is easily my favorite part of the first half and battle therein, and it's not even remotely close with the others. The level of creativity and fun Araki was clearly having during this section oozes from every frame and manga panel. Taking place over the course of 3 entire episodes, the gang arrive at the train station, followed through the point of view of the villains we saw in the flashback earlier through Small Man. During this encounter, Araki spends almost equal amounts of time with the good guys and the bad guys, making it throughout feel as though any side could potentially fail or come away with a win here. And the funny part is that Giorno barely participates, with Araki instead opting to make full use of Mista and Bruno's characters during this fight sequence, and it's all the better for it. When I say that this fight has everything, I mean it. There's some mystery in the bad guys trying to discover where the good guys have gone to in the train. They're in a tortoise, by the way. There's some emotional development for a character of Pesci that undergoes his own character arc within these episodes. There's a sense of mourning on both sides after they think that they've lost their respective partners. There's ludicrously engaging action with some of the most creative implementation of stand abilities in this series, and it elevates every character directly involved. So much so that the two characters of Mista and Bruno became my 2 favorite characters within this part of the story, elevating them both above Giorno for me. And that's just the mechanics within this fight. Araki makes full use of the location that this takes place in too. They kill a bunch of people trapped in a train, they fight on the roof, they fight on the sides, they fight on the inside, and they even stop the train and finish it outside. At numerous instances during this encounter, Araki made full use of what the audience was aware of and what the characters weren't to help build tension also. And he did this with both sides. For instance, when one of the 2 brothers starts to use his stand to age people up, we watch on as Bruno's team try to piece together what's going on and watch them try to figure out how to stop it. Conversely, with the other side of the action, towards the very end, Bruno needs to make full use of his stand power in the most incredible and literally heart-stoppingly intense way he can. All the while we watch on as the fishing rod wielding Pesci struggles to figure out where he went. I could talk about this section of the story and this battle specifically for ages, but in the interest of time, these, if nothing else, are the episodes I think that will sell you on part 5 if you are not a fan of it yet. It's honestly incredible and the best by far in the series. Delivering Trish to her father. I'm not the biggest fan of the next conflict that largely concerns Giorno, not because I don't like Giorno, but because the battle itself felt sort of small and anticlimactic. Perhaps because it came immediately after my favorite part of the story, so let's jump ahead to Venice instead. There's another terrific section of the story focusing on an ice battle with Giorno and Mista that absolutely solidified Mista as my second favorite character in this story. It has some incredible animation, and let me just tell you, this entire part that I've watched so far is top to bottom gorgeous with some truly brilliant animated moments. On the topic of Mista, I adore his personality and his tenacity during this combat sequence, and his little sex pistols are always a treat. The drama in this fight is fittingly high and the action provided was thrilling. Probably my second favorite fight along with Narantsia's fight earlier. Also, it might very well have the best ending of all the fights I've seen. One rather important critique I have for this section, however, is perhaps how it handled the character of Trish. As the daughter of the boss and the package that they've had to deliver over the course of this story, the only things she's really contributed to it have been some small few snarky comments as well as some comedic fan service during the midpoint, which I never really enjoy. It's not my thing. Given how much time has been spent with this team, I would have liked to have cared a bit more about Trish at all by the time she ultimately got delivered to her father. As she's taken up the elevator to meet her long-lost lost familial patriarch, she finally starts to show glimpses of character and uncertainty through the rough and brash exterior she's putting up throughout this trip. This is great, but what would have been much more effective is having this sort of exposition earlier on in the trip. That way tension could potentially build more effectively on their way to the tower, and heck, maybe it might even give more of a motivation to Bruno. Maybe he could have been the one to talk her into it, and once things inevitably go awry once they get to the island in Venice, there could have been more of a reason for him to blame himself and take personal responsibility for her capture and possible death. I thought Trish offered the opportunity to be a rich character with tons to offer the narrative in order to up the stakes. However, instead she came across much more like a damsel in distress, or possibly more accurately a MacGuffin or plot device used to forward the narrative to the midpoint climax like she ultimately did. I hope that by the time I get around to the rest of the second half, she plays a much larger role that offers more to the story than a mute animal could otherwise have achieved. One thing I want to say also about the big bad of this arc is that while I appreciate they wanted to create an insurmountable or intimidating force to overcome using their powers in creative ways, I sort of feel as though Araki has gone to the time manipulation well one too many times during these stories. I mean, since stands have been introduced, the big bad of the arc has always had on some level time manipulation abilities, and after giving it some thought, I've grown to understand why to some extent. It's incredibly powerful. Realistically, when you're creating a villain, there are three schools of thought, I think. Firstly, there's making your antagonist impossibly powerful like Dio in some respects, and certainly like the boss from this part 5. The goal of these villains is not to be relatable or likable, but instead to provide a wall for which the good guys are to overcome. Secondly, there's the opposite of what I just demonstrated a villain to be, and that's being weaker than the hero only to try his best to get more powerful and eventually become that threat. These first two are the most common, and to be honest, both have their ups and downsides. Characters like Dio can feel less like characters and more like walls of power to overcome. Furthermore, they also have a tendency to get predictable and sort of boring if you over-rely on that archetype too often. The weaker villain has the opposite problem in that they are too relatable. People in general love to cheer for the underdog tenaciously fighting against all odds, and so putting your protagonist into a more powerful position prior means you need to make certain that your hero is incredibly likable to your reader or viewer in order for them to cheer for them. Alternatively then, there's the third option, which Araki decided to opt for during Diamond is Unbreakable's story with Kira, and Kira ended up being my favorite antagonist out of this series. Instead of having a villain that is obviously weaker or stronger than Josuke, he instead decided to make him a complement to Josuke. Sort of like the other side of a coin, if you will. I thought Kira was a brilliant foil for Josuke and the most ideal candidate among the JoJo villains for that very reason. And he didn't need time powers either, proven by him not using them once during his fight with Josuke and only using them in the lead up to the battle. Now, obviously there are ways of screwing that option up too, seen all too well in Marvel films where the superheroes like Iron Man, Captain America, Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, and Black Panther even, all seem to face off against evil versions of themselves. Instead of flipping the power set, they flip the personality behind the power, which isn't always bad, but over the course of a series can become formulaic, which I think is JoJo's problem right now with this time manipulation ability. While I did love this scene with Bruno and Giorno in the gloomy hideout confronting the big boss for the very first time, I couldn't help but feel a little underwhelmed when I discovered that, ooh, look, it's time powers again. When the powers of this dude exist, that could have served as a much more of an interesting matchup against Giorno's powers specifically that we never really got to see. Giorno can give life and he can technically take it away. Now, that is all obviously hinging on the idea that Giorno is the main character, and judging by the way this is going, it seems to be much more of an ensemble cast rather than a particularly focused protagonistic story. So we'll see how things go. Anyways, and so now with this big boss man, after putting a hit out on the entire team, we'll see how this entire story decides to progress. Anyways, these are just my immediate thoughts on half of Golden Wind, and next week I'll be sharing my thoughts with how the entire story felt for me, as well as analyzing its ending in detail. Next week will be my last JoJo video until more material becomes available to review, and after that I've got a couple of videos I've wanted for a while, and then a new series begins in April.